A 1985 Pearson 30 sells at Mears Marina in Annapolis, Maryland. The asking price is $20,000. The seller, a retired insurance adjuster from Savannah Park who has owned the boat for 11 years, receives a cashier's check on a Tuesday morning in April. The buyer, a 61-year-old architect from Baltimore County, shakes hands on the dock and takes the keys. The seller does not mention the engine hours. He does not mention the year the standing rigging was last replaced. He does not mention the chainplate survey finding from 2019. $20,000 changes hands, and none of that information travels with it. That was the cheap part. This video is about the financial structure behind that Tuesday morning, and why it repeats itself on docks from the Chesapeake to the Puget Sound every single season. The cheap sailboat is not a bargain. It is a payment plan dressed as a handshake, with 5 extraction mechanisms built into the hull before the buyer ever leaves the dock. The broker's pitch begins with the photographs. A 1985 Pearson 30 sits in afternoon light at a marina in the Chesapeake Bay, the teak cap rail still holding a shine, the hull a clean white above the waterline. Below, the cabin is all varnished wood, and the smell of something close to possibility. A gimbaled stove to port, a chart table fitted with a brass lamp, the kind of arrangement that makes a man see himself offshore at sunrise rather than at the boatyard at 7 in the morning. The broker mentions the previous owner's careful maintenance record, the new standing backstay fitted last summer, the way she handled on the test sail out of the harbor. You stand in the cockpit and the wind is running out of the northwest, and for a moment, the entire proposition feels not just affordable, but obvious. $20,000 for a life on the water. The numbers, what they mean, and what they hide are for later. For now, the dream is real. The marine industry has one rule for ownership cost, and it is repeated on broker websites, insurance handbooks, and marina bulletin boards from Maine to Florida. Budget: 10% of the purchase price per year for maintenance. On a $20,000 sailboat, that figure is $2,000 a year. That number is wrong, and the industry knows it is wrong. The 10% rule was designed to be applied to a boat's original construction cost, not its depressed used market asking price. A 1985 Pearson 30 that sold new at the Annapolis Boat Show for $82,000 still carries the maintenance burden of an $82,000 vessel in 2026. 10% of the original figure is $8,200 annually, 4 times what the buyer on the dock was told to plan for. Boat Trader documents the same flaw independently. Budget roughly 10% of a boat's value in annual maintenance for a $50,000 vessel, or approximately $5,000 per year. The USCG Recreational Boating Survey and industry analysts at Yacht World both put total annual operating costs, slip, haul-out, insurance, and maintenance between $6,000 and $8,000 for a standard 30-foot saltwater cruiser at a mid-range marina. Marina slip fees at U.S. facilities average $50 per linear foot per year, according to Improved Sailing Research, putting a 30-foot annual docking bill at $1,500 to $2,500 before a single system is serviced. These 4 benchmarks, the original value calculation, the total annual floor, the slip rate, and the haul-out cycle, form the backbone of the real ownership equation. They are not worst-case scenarios. They are the industry's own consensus. One figure the industry cites less prominently is osmotic blistering, the water-driven degradation of the fiberglass laminate that affects the majority of pre-1990 hulls kept in salt water, and it costs between $4,000 and $7,000 to repair at a standard boatyard, according to industry sources compiled as recently as March 2026. Severe cases requiring a full hull peel and relamination run $5,000 to $20,000. The blisters are invisible until the boat is hauled. Buyers sign the paperwork before the boat comes out of the water. The architect from Baltimore County arrived at that dock holding none of these numbers. Call him David. David's research had told him the 10% rule put maintenance at $2,000 annually on a $20,000 boat. His first year corrected that. The pre-purchase marine survey, required by the insurer and required by the marina, cost $900 for the inspection and an additional $350 for the haul-out portion. The survey report came back with 11 findings, 3 flagged as immediate: a corroded forward chain plate, electrical wiring failing the ABYCE 11 standard at 2 junction points, standing rigging the surveyor noted as original to the 1985 build. David hired a marine electrician at $120 per hour. He hired a rigger for the uppers and the forestay. Electrical remediation, $1,800. Partial rigging replacement, $2,600. Annual haul-out and anti-fouling paint for a 30-foot saltwater hull at a standard Chesapeake boatyard, $2,000. The marina slip, $2,400 per year. Insurance on a 1985 vessel required a specialty carrier. Most standard carriers cap eligibility at 20 years of age and cost $600 annually under an actual cash value policy. David's year 1 outflow, $34,800 on a $20,000 boat. By the end of year 2, the forward chain plate that David's surveyor had flagged, the one the seller never mentioned, showed active weeping at the deck fitting after a hard northeast blow. The repair required opening the deck above the chain plate and replacing the fitting from below. The boatyard bill was $2,200. By the end of the 3rd year, the boatyard confirmed what the surveyor had flagged in the report. The Universal Diesel, a 1985 engine with an undocumented hour count, needed a rebuild. The invoice was $9,000. David was 63 years old, standing at a boatyard in Deltaville, Virginia, having spent $47,000 on a vessel that the Chesapeake Bay market now valued at $17,000. The gap between those two numbers is the first extraction mechanism made visible. The math is not subtle. The 5 mechanisms behind that gap are not hidden from the industry. They are documented, recurring, and in some cases mandated by physics. The first is the original value inversion. The 10% rule, applied to the purchase price of a heavily depreciated vessel, produces a maintenance budget with no relationship to what that vessel actually costs to maintain. A 1985-era fiberglass sailboat built for $80,000 requires roughly $8,000 a year to run in 2026, regardless of what someone paid for it last Tuesday. Paying $20,000 changes the transaction cost. It does not change the age of the wiring, the hours on the diesel, or the tension cycle history of the standing rigging. The second is the annual haul-out obligation. Every sailboat kept in salt water comes out of the water every 12 months for hull inspection and anti-fouling paint. The 2025 Spring Labor Rate Sheet, published by Holiday Point Marina in Edgewater, Maryland, sets haul-out and bottom painting labor at $29 per linear foot for sailboats, placing the labor cost alone for a 30-footer at $870. Materials and anti-fouling paint add another $800 to $1,200 at current prices, which rose 60% in 2025 due to copper commodity increases. The annual haul cycle costs $2,000 at a mid-range facility before a mechanic, electrician, or rigger examines a single system. It cannot be deferred. It cannot be skipped. Salt water does not negotiate. The third is the engine replacement timeline. A typical marine diesel inboard is designed for approximately 5,000 hours of service before a rebuild, according to ImproveSailing.com. A 1985 sailboat with an undocumented engine history has almost certainly run through the majority of that interval. The rebuild cost for a small inboard diesel runs $2,000 to $5,000, according to marine mechanic estimates published in 2025. A full engine repower, replacement with installation, runs $15,000 to $22,000 on a mid-size cruising sailboat, according to data compiled by Wave Inboard Motors in November 2025. The engine does not announce its hour count in the listing photographs. It announces it at the boatyard. Standing rigging on a saltwater sailboat should be replaced every 10 to 15 years, according to yachtservice.vip. On a 1985 boat purchased in 2026, that interval has lapsed 2 or 3 times. The cost to replace standing rigging on a 30-foot sailboat runs from $2,000 to $3,500 with a professional rigger. The consequence of not replacing it is a mast failure at sea. That leads to a $10,000 repair, conducted not at the dock, but wherever the failure occurs. In 2024, a forum member inquiring about his 34-foot O'Day was told by a rigger that a full replacement would cost $8,000 to $10,000 for a boat that the same forum valued at $22,000. The fifth is the insurance deterioration trap. Marine insurers treat fiberglass vessels from the 1970s and the 1980s as elevated underwriting risks due to osmotic blistering, core degradation, and outdated electrical systems. Stanton Insurance Agency documented in June 2025 that many standard carriers cap coverage eligibility at 20 years of age, forcing owners of older boats onto specialty markets at higher premiums. The industry standard instrument for these boats is the actual cash value policy, legally defined as the vessel's current depreciated worth, not its replacement cost. When a storm damaged the mast of a 1980s sailboat insured under an actual cash value policy in 2024, the insurer applied a 40% depreciation factor to the 40-year-old spar. The owner received 60 cents on the dollar, a check that covered less than 2/3 of what a functional replacement required. The policy was standard. The outcome was documented. The arrangement is only as honest as the fine print allows. This is the legal structure that enforces the extraction. Actual cash value policies on aging vessels are not an edge case. They are the industry norm, standardized by the Society of Accredited Marine Surveyors and the National Association of Marine Surveyors, the same professional bodies whose survey reports determine coverage eligibility in the first place. The buyer who paid $20,000 for a 1985 Pearson 30 is holding a policy that appears to cover the boat. In a significant claim, it covers 50 to 60% of the boat, and the remainder becomes a bill that the purchase price never mentioned. The ledger does not lie. Not every buyer of a cheap sailboat believes the 10% rule. Some of them are engineers who have read the ABYC standards. 3 decades on the water with a tool bag that a boatyard would recognize is another version of the same conviction. Call her Carol. Carol bought a 1983 C&C 30 in Beaufort, North Carolina for $18,000 and intended to maintain the boat entirely herself. She did. She changed impellers and zincs on schedule. She sanded and painted her own bottom every spring, recovering $900 a year in labor. She replaced her standing rigging after sourcing wire from a shop in Massachusetts and spending 2 weekends on the job. Her first 3 years of ownership cost $22,000 out of pocket, materially less than David. And she understood every system on the boat because she had personally rebuilt every system on the boat. Carol learned every nut and bolt. Then the Universal Diesel failed 60 miles offshore of Cape Hatteras at 2 in the morning in February. The engine had 6,200 hours on it. A passing trawler towed her into Morehead City. The rebuild was $9,000, conducted at a Morehead City boatyard because the job required a press and a parts supply chain that Carol did not carry offshore. Her 5-year total was $41,000 on an $18,000 boat. David's 5-year total was $47,000 on a $20,000 boat. A system that profits from the gap between what people believe and what the boatyard actually charges does not distinguish between the informed buyer and the uninformed one. The arithmetic runs regardless. Every buyer who arrives alarmed at those numbers must leave with 3 specific things to run before any offer is made. The first is the original value calculation. Before the handshake, find the original manufacturer's list price for the vessel, not the current asking price. For a 1985 Pearson 30, that original figure was approximately $82,000. Apply 10% to that number. That is the actual annual maintenance budget, $8,200 per year, not $2,000. If the boat produces a gap between what the buyer can sustain and what the vessel requires, the transaction price is already misleading regardless of how attractive it looks. The second is the 5-year capital ledger. Establish 3 specific facts before closing: the engine's documented hour count against the 5,000-hour rebuild interval, the year the standing rigging was last professionally replaced against the 10 to 15-year standard, and the 5-year haul-out cost calculated at the current boatyard rate. A 30-foot saltwater sailboat with undocumented engine hours and original 1985 rigging carries a 3 to 5-year capital bill of $20,000 to $30,000 before the annual running costs are added. Annual running costs, slip, haul-out, insurance, and routine maintenance run $6,000 to $8,000 per year at any standard U.S. marina, according to every industry source compiled in this research. The 5-year total on a $20,000 boat with these characteristics runs to $80,000 minimum. The third is the disclosure question. Ask the seller in writing for the engine hour count and the date and documentation of the last standing rigging replacement. If the answer to either question is unknown, undocumented, or absent, the asking price does not reflect the boat's actual starting position. That is not a negotiating tactic, it is arithmetic. The seller does not want the buyer to run. The $20,000 sailboat is not a bargain. It is a deferred invoice printed on a listing sheet and handed to buyers whose retirement savings are real and whose maintenance budgets are not. In a market where the purchase price is the lowest number in the entire transaction, the only position that protects the buyer is the ledger. Run it before the handshake, not after the haul-out. The doc does not care what the listing said.